Thank you so much for joining me on Ethocast. I'm Eddie Francis. Joining me, one of my colleagues. I love to bring my speaking colleagues on. And so the one and only Maria Maldonado Smith, who, you know, I always forget this about you, that you were Miss Kentucky once
Yes,
upon a time.
once upon a time, a long
That
time
is the
ago. Eddie.
that is the coolest thing. I've never spoken to a Mister or Miss anything besides neighbors. So tell us about the experience of being Miss Kentucky. What was that like? I got to hear this.
It was incredible. It was incredible. It was a goal I set really actually when I was a lot younger. But actually being able to be Miss Kentucky and live out that year and compete at Miss America was definitely a dream come true for sure. A goal I'd had in my mind for a long time. But doing the job, it's like in anything in life, right? Once you actually get into the job, you realize it's so much more than you ever imagined. I think at the time when I was setting those goals and thinking about competing and eventually going to Miss America, for me, it was all about scholarship money. It was all about trying to pay for my college so that I could come out of college, debt free. And once I got into the role, you actually are hired by the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. So you work for them and you are paid to go around to, it's like almost 200 schools, if not, yeah, maybe even more than that. But you make a ton of school appearances and you speak to elementary, middle, and high school students all about a program. Now they call the program is called Kentucky Proud, and it's basically promoting our farmers and food producers. At the time that I was Miss Kentucky, we promoted a program called No Ifs, Ands, or Buts. It's the law, and it was to mitigate the underage purchase of tobacco products. So talk about a very interesting topic. Had to get really creative, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher, so we weren't allowed to talk about anything health related to it. We were just able to talk about like you're not 18, so therefore you shouldn't smoke.
Don't
And
do it.
right, don't do it. In one of the highest tobacco producing states at that time in our nation. So very, very interesting. That was so maybe that was like clue number one that this job was going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. But no, but we actually the way that I ended up framing my talk, I got a suggestion from a sorority sister of mine, believe it or not, who was a smoker at the time, is no longer, but at the time, and she said, I always think about if I could kick this habit, how much money I would save if I had never smoked. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, that's brilliant. Like, and we was just in casual conversation. She and I were talking. I had, you get an apartment as Miss Kentucky. So I was moving into my new apartment and she was in town before she was about ready to leave to go back to Chicago where she lived. And we were just sitting on my couch and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to say to these school kids. Like, I totally am like down for talking about dreaming big and all these other things. But that creative spin really was the catalyst for me developing out a really cool keynote and program for them to talk about the difference of if we saved all that money instead of purchasing tobacco products, which at the time a pack of cigarettes was $3.16. You compound that over time with interest in 10 years, you're a millionaire. And so like showing that visually to kids was huge. I had these massive poster boards and I would have all these pictures. I cut out a picture of like Air Jordans and then I just replicated it and I put like 60 on this like one big poster board. And I was like, you could have, 150,000 pairs or whatever, of like Air
Yeah.
Jordan, like basically just to give them that visual piece. So probably also like a little like seed was planted to like what I do now and how I run my own business because I do similar type tactics in the work that I do now. Yeah, but it was
Yeah.
really fun. It was really, really fun to represent my home state. And my father's an immigrant, so he was, came to this country, and so to have his daughter like represent the country that he just, loves and so much. Well, and I say loves in the present. He passed, but
Yeah.
we still talk daily. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I get that. And so Maria here, is someone, again, I've had the pleasure of working with her as a speaker. She is the Chief Empowerment Officer of MMS Consulting and a member of Alpha Delta Pi. And so, goal setting Is one of those things. Okay, so confession time. Goal setting is one of those things I've struggled with for a very, very long time. I'm just getting used to goal setting. But I want to talk about, first of all, your engagement with your sorority, because you stay very engaged with them. And one thing I'm really curious about is, what is something that you like to impress upon your sorority sisters about leadership whenever you speak with them?
To take advantage of the opportunities that they have right now. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing I want to impart on them is that I didn't realize until I was starting into my career and out of college, and even honestly in the role of Miss Kentucky, like how much my leadership opportunities in Alpha Delta Pi helped me so much in that role, and then helped me even more when I went into the corporate world and spent 18 years working in corporations as a sales leader, leading teams, developing people. Like being in a sorority it's so many things. It's conflict resolution 101. It's leading your peers 101, which sometimes can be hard because the very peers that are voting you into an elected position are also sometimes the very ones that you're butting heads with when they
Uh
don't like
huh.
what it is
Don't
that
I
you
know
do.
it?
So the skills that you're developing and learning being in that environment are incredible. And I always say it because, like, as the older person, like looking back, I'm like, girls, this is the stuff that you gotta, like, wrap your heads around, like really like take it in. And of course they're like, okay, yeah, we just want to have a really fun day party and like raise a lot of money for the Ronald McDonald House. I'm like, yes, absolutely. But while you're at it, make sure that you're taking stock in all of the leadership things that you're learning. So I actually have a workshop where, alongside goal setting, we're actually starting to identify how their role looks on a resume. So how does the sergeant at arms look on a resume? How does the president look on a resume? The vice president, the VP of finance, membership education. Oh my gosh, you're kidding me. Like there's so many nuggets of like wonderful skills and leadership aspects that they can relay from those types of positions. And then just being involved in a sorority. Because I also have women who will say, well, I wasn't in a leadership position. Okay, but you still what? You showed up, you participated, you were a part, you were a member of something bigger than yourself. You were a part of that community to drive an overall mission. So I think we also shouldn't discount the fact that not everyone wants a leadership position when they're in college. Some women want it and they just have other things going on. They're on a sports team or they're engaged in an arts-based program that just doesn't allow for the time commitment, and just being in the community is like all that they can manage. And that's okay. I think that there's beauty in that too. And then we can show and develop how we were able to set those boundaries and yet still prioritize needs that were important to us.
What when you talk to them, and you get some of the feedback from them, at what point do you say to yourself, okay, nothing's really changed? It's the same thing, just rinse and repeat from generation to generation. And then at what point do you say, oh, well, that's new. What's this about again? What are you doing? So what are some of the things that remain the same? What are some of the things that are different?
I think what remains the same is still the drive, the ambition, the desire to build sisterhood, and the longevity, like looking into the future of, I've got my career ahead of me, and this experience in this organization over these next 4 years will be with me forever. I don't think that has changed once. Like I still feel that it still is like palpable when you walk into the doors of any chapter of, whether that's 80 Pi or Kappa Delta or Chi Omega, like in any chapter that I have been invited into. I still feel that, like, on behalf of them, even though I might not be one of their sisters. Like it's just a part of that sisterhood feeling and that environment that is created. I think what has changed is most definitely technology, for sure. I mean, that's probably the first thing I would say. I still remember writing paper calendars, writing all of our notes on paper, making physical copies of them, passing them out to people. And I mean, I was like early 2000s. I was 2000 to 2004. So it doesn't feel like I should be this old. And yet, everything now is like iPad driven or, PowerPoint presentation or Canva presentation driven. And I love that. I love that because those are skills they're developing now that I had to hone and develop when I was in the corporate space. And so those are things that I think are different, but yet I like that, especially having a daughter who's going to be a senior in high school and thinking about that journey for her. There are a lot of opportunities I think that she will develop and have exposure to that are going to set her apart when she is ready to go out into the real world. Yeah.
You're listening to Ethocast. I'm Eddie Francis, and joining me is Maria Maldonado Smith. And Maria is someone who talks about goal setting. She is into leadership, of course. She's a speaker, and so let's talk about goal setting. And you talk about the neuroscience of goal setting, which sounds very, very cool. What is that, and how do you apply that to fraternity sorority life?
Mhm. So our brain is incredibly powerful, and I think that's the key. I talk a lot about goal setting from a visual perspective because 80 to 90% of us are visual learners, yet less than 3% of us set goals. Like actually sit down and set goals. And I think that's, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said earlier, you have like a difficult relationship or like a strain, almost like a love-hate relationship sometimes with goal setting, right?
Yes, it is
Yeah.
love hate.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's love-hate. I get it because we have to have goals in mind. I think the irony is that it's just that's just it. They're in mind. They're in our mind. Whenever I do a workshop and I always ask people, who here has goals they're working towards? Everyone raises their hand. I'm like, oh yes, this is amazing. And then I ask the follow-up question, how many have them written down in a detailed plan on how you're going to get there? And then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
no, I don't. No, I don't. And then I back up and I say, okay, how many of you just wrote them down? You just like stuck them on a post-it note or something, And then it's like, kind of, yeah. I have like maybe a to-do list, And like, okay, exactly. I'm like, this is where I want to start. This is where I want to start. And I start anywhere whether I'm with a group of executive leaders in an organization, nonprofit employees or their leadership team, in government entities, in sororities, fraternities. This is where I start because we all have the best of intentions. And the thing is that if we're casting a vision for our 4 years in our collegiate institution, we got to have some goals that we can measure and track over those 4 years. I'm not looking for people to accomplish things in 3 months, 6 months, even a year sometimes, because this is progress that we're building towards. That's why it takes 4 years to get your degree, to earn that,
Mhm.
because you're building the blocks of that knowledge base that it's going to take to get you there. So I start there by just impressing upon the power of our brain and how powerful our brain is. We have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. The majority of them are negative. And so we have to learn how to rewire our brain for that positive thinking. I know it sounds a little woo. Sometimes it sounds a little cringy, like, oh my gosh, what do you mean I got to rewire my brain for positive thinking? Like, oh, you're going to tell me to do affirmations? Yeah, I am. I am going to tell you to do affirmations. 100%. I'm going to tell you. My kids have them on their mirrors. Like we have them on our mirrors. Things that when I wake up, I don't want to forget, just stick it on a post-it note. These are all over the place in our house, like everywhere, different colors, all things. I have my own branded ones, like because I know how much we forget things because we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So there's that piece of how our brain kind of can overpower us or overwhelm us when we're not specifically, writing things down. Because I say, listen, if you're just thinking about them up here, unfortunately, it's a fleeting thought. You think, oh, that would be a great goal. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. But then in a nanosecond, something else has already taken its place and another thought has come into your head. And that thought could be negative or could be pervasive or overwhelming. And it starts to compound. And you have all of these types of thought processes that are occurring. So in order to rewire our brain, we have to introduce it to new things. It's why the saying, you have to get uncomfortable or comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's literally what we're doing. Our brain wants to work on our behalf. It wants to do what we ask it it to do, which typically means it wants to be very comfortable. It
Yeah.
wants to do what we ask it to, which is, I don't want to go work out. Okay, cool. Let's not. I don't really want to eat that salad. I'd rather have the burger. Oh my God, a burger is so amazing. Absolutely. Like, think about it. It's always like that little, like, angel devil, like, and that's essentially what your brain is doing. And there's chemicals involved in it. There's dopamine, of course, is
Yep.
one
I
of
was going to
those
say, yep.
but you've got norepinephrine, you've got serotonin involved. And those chemical responses, when they interact, they're going to release a response, and that's either going to be positive or negative. And so when I work with fraternities and sororities, especially, I remind them that what we're looking for is to have something that we can achieve that dopamine response tied to, not tied to this, but tied to our goals. And so we thoughtfully write out what it is we're working to achieve.
Are you familiar with Tuckman's model of team formation by any chance?
No.
The forming, norming, no, forming, storming, norming, performing. And so I think about that because that's something that I bring up in followership to leadership whenever I speak to fraternity sorority members. And one of the things that I bring up to them is that in fraternity and sorority life, what we have to deal with in college is that you mentioned 4 years. In some cases, it's 3 years, it's 2 years. Some people decide the last year of college they want to do it.
Yeah.
But in that time is compressed. And so a lot of our fraternity sorority members, I was a chapter president. And so you have so much less time to figure out what the goal is going to be and how to help drive the chapter towards that goal. And
Yeah.
so it occurs to me that even more so being able to set goals and being able to stick to the process of meeting that goal, it becomes that much more important, it seems. So that whole way of understanding how your brain works, and I'm ADHD, so I have to understand what a dopamine rush is. And
Yes.
so in a fraternity sorority, it is so much easier to say party over study. It is so much easier to say, go hang out with the frat brother, go hang out with the sorority sister, go get the burger with the frat brother, the sorority
Yes.
sister, when I
Yeah.
know I actually probably should be on my way to class. I mean, that it occurs to me that what you're doing is that much more important. So whenever you are talking to fraternity sorority members and you can see that light bulb going off with them, what kinds of conversations do you have with them, say after a presentation, when they realize how much really is involved in goal setting, but then being able to progress toward a goal?
Mhm. So you're bringing up so many wonderful like nuggets of like, and like what we would say in ADPI, like pearls of wisdom, in the
Yeah.
sense that yes, the goal setting is just literally scratching the surface. That's like, okay, I wrote the goal down, I got specific, I'm going to measure it. Here's how it's achievable, here's how it's relevant, time bound. Great, got my smart method. I add an E and an R onto my process. I think a lot of people do, which is evaluate, because we need to evaluate, do we even like this goal anymore? And then the R is reward, how we're going to reward
Mm.
ourselves for our success, because that's a big catalyst and piece to us staying engaged with that goal. Are we actually going to stay involved? Well, we know when we reward ourselves, we get there a lot faster, and reward ourselves consistently, not just at the very end. So what I would say is that yes, that you've scratched the surface, but now you have identified something that's very important to you. And so goals are very personal. And so what I would say to any member of a sorority or fraternity is that once you've identified the goal and you've taken yourself through that process, now comes even the nittier and grittier part of, how do I set boundaries around this goal to make sure that at all cost I achieve it? I think one of the biggest things I talk about, and I find this more so with my women groups, honestly, just like whether I'm doing a women's empowerment group or working with a sorority, is just allowing ourselves and giving ourselves that permission to say that we are worthy of accomplishing this goal and that we can honor it. and really honor that commitment at all costs. Because I think, Eddie, that's the biggest thing, is that we are learning before our brain fully develops. We have this collegiate experience and this opportunity to really say, now, how am I going to set myself up for success when at 25, 20, studies are now saying more like 28, like 28 years of age, and my brain is fully developed, that I am like set. Because these types of habits and processes are so much more difficult to put in place when you are older, when you are out into the working world. To try to set a cadence for consistency in your life becomes really difficult if it's not learned at a younger age. We know that about most everything in life. You know, when we can incorporate healthier habits, and when we how our brain learns all of that. The reason that we start school at such a young age, and we start to introduce concepts slowly over time, so that by the time we are out of high school and ready for college, we're prepared. It's the same. It's the same thing. So I would say three things come into play. Prioritization through time management would be one. Setting boundaries, and then procrastination is one that we have to address, because it's very much an emotional trigger. I work a lot with groups that I say to them, have you ever felt like, oh, I'm just so lazy, or that person's so lazy? And I said, yeah, exactly. We throw that term around. And really, I like to use laziness as a reward. I get to be lazy because I worked my butt off, and now I'm going to lay and I'm going to rest, and I'm going to be lazy in the sun or on the couch with a book. I truly believe that we're not lazy by choice or desire. It's driven by an emotional response to something that we don't want to have happen. Going back to the brain, going back to that, our brain wants to do what makes us comfortable. It wants to create stability and calm and peace and joy in our life. And so being uncomfortable means that our brain has to do more work for us. It's got to create more neural networks and more neural pathways so that we can learn and absorb new information, and we can do something differently. Once we get our brain over that hump and we get ourselves over that hump, we start to believe that we are capable of accomplishing it. So procrastination is so much of an emotional trigger. It's usually driven by fear of failure, rejection, not understanding where to start. So we are stalled into an action because we're overthinking so much, and we've already talked ourselves 10 ways to Sunday out of how this goal might not work. We can't even get started. So procrastination becomes a huge thing. And so I always say, you just got to start. You got to rip the Band-Aid off. And even if it's like, you know what, I said I was going to run a mile today. I don't care. Run a half mile then. Run a half. Get started. Do something. And then from there, you got to set the boundary. You got to understand, what is my boundary for this? I'm going to go no less than 2 times a week engaging in this goal or this activity, and set that boundary and honor it. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not looking for all or nothing. I don't think any of us are. Like that, I think, is something that college students bring to me often, is that feeling of like, I have to be perfect, or I have to get this right. And this is actually your time to not get it right at all. And this is your time to figure out what's going to work best for you. And then that third piece would be the time management of it all. Is understanding that your goal is so important to you that you will prioritize it above the burger and the talk with a friend, for the
Yeah.
time being, or that you say, I got to get this done first because this is what's so important to me. And then afterwards, how about we go get that burger and that conversation?
Yeah, and you know what? It's so interesting. I've interviewed a few people on this podcast about the way we behave in fraternity and sorority life, and it's interesting how many times that belief that we have to be perfect has come
Mhm.
up. It just comes up constantly. With that being said, this is a really good segue into something that I saw on one of your social media posts, and you wrote, "You don't have to figure it out alone." On one of your posts to the women in sororities, particularly, and so I wonder about that, because I think that's also common in fraternity men. I think a lot of us believe, especially men, because we're so pigheaded. I think we're sitting there like, well, if I don't figure it out alone, then I'm a loser. And I think a lot of us believe that. Why do you think we are under so much pressure to figure it out alone? And by definition, We're in fraternities and sororities. We're in brotherhoods and sisterhoods. So we should be leaning on each other. But why do you think we have to figure it? We feel that we have to figure it out
Yeah.
alone.
Oh my gosh. Well, whew, that's a loaded question. Um, because I have about four different responses to that. Meaning, I think there are different reasons why. One, I think that it's born of just our intrinsic desire to not burden anyone else with our problems, with our issues. It's why we won't ask for help. And the irony, I actually just shared this recently with a sister via a DM over Instagram who said, yeah, I have a hard time asking for help. And I was like, oh, I'm like, it is hard, isn't it? It is. It's hard to ask for help. However, studies show that when people are asked for help, 93% of people will say, I would love to help someone. If they asked me, I'm there for them. I want to know how I
Oh
can
wow.
support them. I want to know how I can be there for them. I think in our mind, it's a narrative that we create that, man, if I ask for help, I'm showing one, a sign of weakness, and two, I'm burdening someone with my ask or with my need. I think we also think we should be able to figure it out on our own, but that's just not life. I have a dog who would like to leave the room. He doesn't like
That
that I'm
is
saying.
perfect. Wait, I thought it was my dog trying to get into the room.
No, it's mine. She's
Hey, hey, Pooch, it's all right.
I
You
know.
don't have to do it alone, Pooch.
She's like, this talk, Maria, is making me uncomfortable. No.
But you know what? You were when you were talking, I also thought about we're high achievers too.
Mhm.
And so we're just like, well, if I don't get this done, if I can't do this alone, then what good am I? I mean, I've had that thought
Yes.
that if I can't figure it out, then I'm surely I'm not worth my salt as an alpha man. I have had those kinds of thoughts before that I shouldn't have to call on my frat brothers because I should know how to do this thing. I should know how to get through this problem. I should know how to straighten myself up and go study instead of going to step practice and that sort of thing. So I mean that high achieving thing is another thing that to me it seems like it's just a bit of a bugaboo that makes us believe we have to do it alone. Do you think so? Or
Oh,
have you seen that?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that what you find in, like you just said, I think what you find in fraternities and sororities is that so many of those high achievers are ascending to positions of leadership because we're drawn to it, and then two, we are just inclined to always be trying to better ourselves, always, we're always trying to focus on what's the next level, how can I level up, how can I be better, how can I learn more. And so because we always outwardly appear to have all of the answers, when we don't, it's a shock to our own system of, oh, I don't have the answer. I don't know what to do here. I also think, and this is why I said this is a loaded question, because I think there's also this side to me that does fear for, in some ways, for our younger generation of fraternity and sorority members, is this idea of social media and always seeing people's highlight reels. And so we're seeing the end product of things.
Hmm.
And so helping people understand how you got there. So like the influencer that gets to, the end of their whatever goal, or they're posting their video, will back me up and show me everything that led up to that, so that I, as a grown woman, know that that's the case, but younger, impressionable minds might not realize that. And when they're inundated with it, they are actually rewiring their brains. So the images that we see are so incredibly powerful. I share this stat often with groups that I work with because I think this bleeds right into the whole inability to ask for help. We're so emotionally and visually overstimulated. If you have one social media account, you see anywhere from 10 to 100 images a day based on the length of time you're spending on that platform. So if you multiply that by, I've got Instagram, I've got TikTok, I've got Snapchat for my kids. I've got, but I've got LinkedIn, I've got Facebook. I mean, I've got five just right there. And that doesn't even take into account WhatsApp, which 6.9 billion images a day are shared across WhatsApp alone. Over 14 billion images are uploaded and exchanged online every single day. That alone is an overwhelming number. By 2030, the estimates are that it'll be over 1 trillion. So when we think about how we goal set and how we see our goals out in the universe and how we see them out in play, it's really hard for me to see that I'm capable of accomplishing something when all I'm doing all day is scrolling and I'm embedded in other people's lives, or I'm embedded in other people's highlight reels or their end result. I think it's something that we have to be mindful of, because I love social media. I love a good social media post. I love sharing, but we have to do it. We have to set those boundaries on it so that it doesn't interfere with the vision that we're creating for our life. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I find in addressing with the younger generation, whether that's middle school, high school, and even on up into college. And then because that directly feeds into our inability to ask for help, because we start making assumptions. We start making assumptions that clearly this person just has it all together and I don't. So therefore, where do I even begin? And then that creates that false narrative, and those negative thoughts of, start to creep in. I'm incapable of doing that. I could never do something like that. I wouldn't even know where to begin. The whole time, all we have to do is just simply ask for help and be willing to say, I don't know. I do a lot of interview prep for women competing in the Miss America system and the Miss USA system and a lot of different systems. But one of the things that I always share with them is, one, I'll never tell them what to say. Their words and thoughts need to be their own, need to be original. But two, if they don't know the answer to a question, it's okay to say, I don't know. Now I'm curious though to learn more about what you just asked me about. So thank you for the question. I don't have an answer for you that would be adequate. Like, I wouldn't even want to try and make something up because I just simply don't know. But now you've brought something into my knowledge sphere, my realm of knowledge. Now I'm aware of it. Now I'm going to go seek out an answer. And we might never meet again in this particular thing, but at least I'm going to know how I feel about whatever it is that you just asked me. That is so much more of a thoughtful, intentional response, instead of just trying to wing it and figure something out and stumble over your words and ramble on about something that you truly have no clue what you're talking about. The same goes with asking for help. We have to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, but if you will help me, or I've identified that you're someone who can help me, you're doing a couple of things. One, you're going to find out the answer. And two, you're helping to boost the self-esteem and confidence of the person that you've come to. So it's really a two-way street when it comes to asking for help.
So, Maria, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, learn more about you, how can they do it?
Well, I just mentioned I'm like pretty much in all the places that you can be. I'm on the TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Instagram, more specifically. I'm on Facebook as well. You can also email me, Maria at mmsconsultingfirm.com. And then you can also visit my website, mmsconsultingfirm.com. Yeah, and reach out to me. I would love I have a YouTube channel as well where it's got the episodes from my first season of my podcast. And so we've got a second season coming out as well. It's called Creating the Vision. It's on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you would get your podcasts. And I also have a workbook that's on Amazon. It's called Creating a Vision Board. And it really does explain a lot of the neuroscience behind why and how we can effectively set goals.
Oh, that is so cool. So, all of Maria's information in the show notes. Maria, thank you so much for joining me on
Yes,
Ethocast.
thank you.